Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you all for joining me here today. Sometimes as the mayor, you make decisions that no one's gonna like. This might be one of those, we'll see. So I'm here today to announce my decision about the city's surveillance pilot project. This is a decision about more than cameras. It's about how we approach public safety, how we build trust, and how we show up for communities across this city. And it's important that we get it right. So I want to start by establishing where things stand today. In April of 2025, Seattle launched the Real-Time Crime Center, or RTCC, with 62 police CCTV cameras located in 3 areas: downtown, along Aurora Avenue North, and in the Chinatown International District. This was presented as a pilot program, the Technology Assisted Public Safety Pilot Program. The legislation authorizing the installation of these cameras and the creation of the RTCC included a commitment to evaluate this pilot once it was implemented. Before any evaluation was completed, a decision was made late last year by the previous mayor and council to expand the program to include 3 additional neighborhoods: the Stadium District, the area in the Central District around Garfield High School, and the Capitol Hill Nightlife District. I expressed my concerns about this expansion during last year's campaign. So as we stand here today, none of the cameras that are intended for the pilot's expansion have yet been installed, turned on, or connected to the RTCC. In fact, they have yet to even be received from Axon, the vendor used by the city's program. So what we have in front of us is not a fully implemented program, but a pilot, which was expanded before many policies have been formalized and before its outcomes have been evaluated. I want to acknowledge that this is a controversial issue. For some people, seeing CCTV cameras in the neighborhood where they live or work or attend school makes them feel safer. For others, those same cameras make them feel less safe. Those feelings are important because our quality of life is partly about our feelings of safety or lack thereof, and our sense that our city is a welcoming place that is designed with consideration for our well-being and our humanity. But precisely because different people and different communities experience the cameras differently, it's important to base a decision on more than feelings. It's important to ground our actions in a thorough understanding of how the cameras are being used, of the public benefits they are providing, and of any harm they are causing or could cause. I believe in approaching governance deliberately, and I did not want to rush this decision before my team had been able to visit the Real-Time Crime Center, review data retention policies, explore any potential vulnerabilities, listen to people on every side of this issue, and engage with the Community Police Commission, the Seattle Police Department, and other privacy and civil liberty experts. Today, I'm ready to announce my path forward, and then I'm going to share a bit of context about how the program operates and how I came to my decision. And then we'll have time for some questions. So here's what I've decided. First, I am pausing expansion of this pilot until we have completed a privacy and data governance audit and taken significant steps to strengthen our policies. In the meantime, the RTCC will continue to operate and existing cameras will remain in place. There are 2 specific circumstances where I am making additional targeted decisions. First, given the unique nature of the upcoming World Cup and the current geopolitical situation, I have chosen to move forward with the installation of the cameras in the Stadium District slated for this spring. However, they will not be turned on and will not be connected to the RTCC unless we are aware of a credible threat that warrants such action. And they will be turned off once that threat subsides. And second, I am turning off one currently installed camera, which has a view of a facility that provides reproductive health care and gender-affirming care. I have confirmed that SPD's current practice is to mask or blur those locations, but until we've completed a comprehensive security audit and have stronger safeguards in place, I don't believe it's worth taking that risk. In the event of a surge of immigration enforcement similar to what was seen in Minneapolis, I will, of course, turn off all cameras in order to prevent them from potentially being abused by federal authorities. While it is already policy that SPD may not share information with ICE absent a court order, I'm also directing SPD to immediately inform the mayor and council if we learn of any information sharing with ICE of any kind, even if that information is unrelated to the CCTV program. Finally, I am temporarily pausing all use of automatic license plate readers, or ALPRs, which capture and record the license plates of all vehicles in a specific area. The state legislature recently added welcome new restrictions to limit the potential abuse of this technology. We will pause the use of this tool in Seattle until we can ensure that our practices are consistent with the new state law and reflect the best safety and security policies. So these are big decisions, and I know that I'll receive a lot of questions about them, and there'll be some time for that soon. But I want to take a moment first to talk about how the RTCC works right now, and then surveillance more broadly. The RTCC is an office within SPD headquarters that operates police CCTV cameras, which are affixed to poles in public spaces. The police CCTV cameras continuously capture footage of specific zones within specific neighborhoods, parts of the downtown business district along 3rd Avenue, parts of the Chinatown International District up to and including 12th and Jackson, and parts of the North Aurora corridor. These areas were initially selected based on reported concentrations of certain types of crime. The RTCC also integrates live feeds from many traffic cameras. That traffic camera footage is already public and viewable in numerous other locations. RTCC operators are civilian employees of the police department, and they may not share data or information with federal, state, or other city jurisdictions for enforcement efforts related to immigration enforcement, reproductive rights, or gender-affirming care, absent a court order or judicial warrant. While the police CCTV cameras capture footage continuously, they are not continuously monitored. When a relevant 911 call is received, cameras in the RTCC are activated, and operators can zoom in, pivot, and thus provide additional visual information about the area. In general, camera footage is stored on-site and retained locally for 5 days, after which it is deleted. However, if footage is connected to an incident, it is uploaded to and retained on servers operated by our technology vendor, Axon, on their seattle.gov platform. This footage may be used in investigations related to reported incidents. I know that cameras can be, have been, and will be useful tools to solve crime in Seattle and in countless other cities across the world. I believe in the good faith and good judgment of the people currently operating the RTCC. But too many of the most important protections rely on standard operating procedures rather than clear enforceable policy. I'm also aware of the reports that the State Department of Licensing and other agencies have provided information to federal authorities, and we need to make sure that a similar data leak cannot happen here in Seattle, whether intentionally or unintentionally. That means putting in place clear, enforceable protections for how surveillance data is stored, accessed, and shared. I also remain concerned that we don't know enough about the security of our data when it is transferred to off-site evidence.com servers, which may be located in states with different degrees of legal protection and could be vulnerable to subpoena. And more broadly, I believe it is not good governance to expand a pilot program without completing an evaluation of its impacts. That's why I'm pausing the planned expansion until we are able to complete an audit and strengthen protections. We are working with NYU's policing project to conduct the data governance and privacy audit. This audit will specifically examine whether current policies and practices address potential harms to civil rights and civil liberties adequately. The UPenn evaluation, overseen by the Office of the Inspector General, is focused on evaluating crime occurrences, investigative outcomes, police operations, and community perceptions of the RTCC. I know this issue has become an intense focus of public interest, and I think it's also important to zoom out a little bit. There's no doubt that these cameras make it easier to solve some crimes, including serious ones like homicides. But also, cameras are not the one key to making our neighborhoods safe. And on the other hand, there are legitimate concerns about privacy, over-surveillance, and potential misuse of surveillance technologies. But also, these cameras are not the primary threat to immigrants, trans people, or people seeking reproductive health care in our country right now. There is so much more to public safety and so much more to protecting the communities being targeted by the federal government. These are big, sticky, multidimensional problems with no simple answers. And in that context, the cameras start looking like an easy switch that can be turned on or off. So I know that some people will be upset that I am not turning off all the cameras immediately. And others will be upset that I am not charging ahead with turning on more. To those people, I say, let's work together on the bigger project of making SoDo and the Central District and Capitol Hill and neighborhoods throughout the city safer for everyone. And let's work together on all the ways that we can keep immigrants and other vulnerable communities safe from federal overreach and abuse. All the ways that are not as easy as flipping a switch. I am committed to that work. So even if you disagree with me about this decision, let's move forward on that together. Please consider my office a partner in that work. I want to thank all the advocates who've been active on this issue on all sides. I know that in many ways we all want the same thing, for all of us to be able to get where we need to go, spend time in our neighborhoods, and live our lives knowing that we will come home safe. I also want to thank Chief Sean Barnes and SPD for their collaboration as my office has been working toward these decisions. And in particular, I want to thank Commander Doug Raguso and the staff at the Real-Time Crime Center for their work and partnership. I want to thank members of the City Council for productive conversations, and everyone in my office who has been working very hard on this issue. The decisions we make now will shape our city and our sense of safety, privacy, and trust in government for years to come. So we need to take the time to get the right policies in place. And hopefully we can find some more common ground along the way. So my decision today is just the first step. I will be holding a town hall next Friday at Town Hall Seattle for a more in-depth conversation on this issue, and so that people can have a further chance to weigh in on this issue with me directly. And now, stay in for questions. I have, also to help me out, I have Cadman Cahill, my general counsel, who's been doing a ton of work on this issue, and Lee Hunt, executive director of crime and community harm reduction, and happy to take some questions.
Yeah. Mayor, how long are you giving yourself to do this review? And then, you know, to the point that some have made that kind of the toothpaste is out of the tube already, SDOT has cameras, Ring cameras everywhere. How do you kind of think of other monitoring devices that the city uses?
Yeah, so I think we anticipate, and Cadman might be able to weigh in here, we anticipate that the security audit that we're going to be conducting will take a few months probably. So that's kind of our initial timeline for getting some more information. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a much larger conversation about all the kinds of surveillance that we are subjected to all day, every day. I mean, we have, you know, our phones and our computers are surveilling us 24/7 in the interest of making profit. We have, you know, many other levels of government have different surveillance technologies. And yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if you want to clarify your question, but I think the RTCC cameras are one piece of a bigger puzzle. There's something that we at the city have very direct control over in terms of being able to set our own policies and decide kind of how they're used.
I guess just within the context that you just described of mass surveillance, why is this sort of the perhaps last straw, or why does it make sense to draw a line at these, you know, not that many cameras?
I mean, it's a thing that we have control over here at the city. So, you know, I can't set policy for everything. Yeah.
Well, to preface, we've been reporting for the last few years in Convergent Media in the Central District and South End and speaking to the actual victims of crime that are happening right now and not perceived threats that might happen in the future. But a lot of people on the ground level, as you know, welcome these cameras because they're the ones who are actually being victimized today by usually repeat offenders. My question is to you, you said that it was important that the city works with people on both sides of this issue. What exactly in your office? What are you committed to in your office besides just listening sessions of, you know, people voicing their concerns? What does that mechanism look like to bring people who don't want cameras and people who do want cameras to some kind of compromise here within the city? Is it just listening, or are you going to assign somebody in your office? This is a world responsibility to get to a resolution?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people in my office have been having conversations with various stakeholders and people in the community with a variety of opinions. So as I mentioned, we're having a town hall next week. So that's one opportunity for people with all kinds of opinions to come together and voice those in a public setting, as well as to, you know, here I think it's going to be a conversation between probably me and another person to get at some of the more kind of nuances of this debate in kind of a long form format. But yeah, I mean, I think we're open. So if you have thoughts about like, you know, if it makes sense to bring together folks with different perspectives in more of like a small conversation format or something, I think we're open to different ways that this engagement could look. But yeah,
I was just playing off of what you said,
yeah,
ma'am. What you said is that you want to bring the different sides of this issue together, and I guess what I'm saying is, besides a listening session, which is important because there's lots of perspectives here. Does the office of the mayor have any intentions in a more formal capacity to see how there is a bridge gap there? You know, as we said, oftentimes the voice of victims, people who are actually victimized right now, they're not as loud as other groups.
For sure.
And a lot of times they're overlooked. And so I'm just seeing if there's a formal kind of situation here beyond listening.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that planned, but I'm very open to working on something like that. I think that could be really productive.
Mayor, do we know how many license plate readers are in the city of Seattle? When you say turn them off, how many are we talking about?
I don't know, but Lee, do you know that?
Our license plate readers are assigned to each of our patrol vehicles, as well as to 6 of our parking enforcement officers. So all of those will be turned off. It's about 400 right now, depending on if the patrol vehicle is in service or out of service.
Does that include like the Highway 99 tunnel license plate reader?
We don't have those at all. That's not under the SPD purview.
Mayor, I have a question about your statement about this being based on data and not feelings. There are values at play here too, and if a security report comes back and says it's totally secure, can you talk about how your values are going to inform, or not inform a decision about these cameras?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the audit comes back and says everything's totally secure, we're not at all worried about this data getting into the hands of the federal government, I think likely my decision at that point would be to move forward with the expansion of the pilot. But I do think that there's a larger conversation to be had about just given that there are do you want to live in a society where there's like cameras on every corner, right? I think that's a very legitimate question. And I think there's a kind of a weighing of the public benefit that the cameras are providing in terms of our ability to solve crimes and sometimes intervene when crimes are in progress, right? I think that's a real benefit, right? But then that has to be weighed against just general privacy concerns and then just risks of misuse. That's not even just overreach by the federal government, but other ways that this data could be misused or contribute to over-policing, or there's other considerations. So I think that in general, moving forward, I would like to do a lot more thinking and have more of a public conversation around what that balance is. Is there some level of crime in a neighborhood where it's warranted to have these CCTV cameras? Because otherwise, why don't we just put them everywhere, right? That would make things even easier, right? So I think there are real questions there. And so yeah, if that answers your question, I think I would be inclined to move forward with the proposed pilot expansion, but before doing anything else, have more of that big conversation around values and kind of those balances.
Does that include the UPenn study? Because I mean, you're sort of stating that they're effective, but I don't think we know yet.
I mean, I think anecdotally, there are, SPD, I can tell you many instances when the cameras have been helpful in solving crimes. So yeah, I think that is partly what I'm hoping that the UPenn study is going to help us with, is really a more evidence-based assessment of like what is the utility of the cameras. Because it's one thing, I know it's one thing to say like these cameras have been used in this many incidents, but like how many crimes probably wouldn't have been able to been solved without them, or how many would take more kind of in-person police capacity or taken longer to solve, right? And so we need a lot more of that texture, I think. And also we need to understand just the range of the kinds of crimes that they're being used for now, because there's just a lot of nuance there as well.
Following up on that, what about the public safety outcomes that you've heard from SPD or seen otherwise was not sufficient to take the risk with the potential vulnerability of data?
Say that again?
What about the public safety outcomes, whether it's what SPD has told you or what you, understanding you have an evaluation that you're undertaking, but about what SPD has told you that the cameras have been used for so far, what about that was not sufficient to take the risk with data and what potentially access to these cameras?
Well, I mean, we're in a moment where I think there's just heightened anxiety in immigrant communities and other communities that are being targeted by the federal government. And so I think there's just kind of it's a good moment to be extra cautious and to demand a higher bar in terms of trust in our data security and storage and sharing practices. And so, I think that what I've seen from what I've heard from SPD and what I've, seen at the Real-Time Crime Center, right? I think there's no doubt that the cameras are useful again in solving crimes, and but I just think that this is a moment where it makes sense to pause.
Have those experiences changed your mind on these cameras?
I mean, I think not. I mean, not entirely. I mean, I think like I have the same concerns that I was expressing all last year about the potential for misuse of the data, right? So that hasn't changed. But I know a lot more now about how these cameras work and what they're used for. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of changes your perspective when you learn more. But I don't think that I'm in like a wildly different place than I was last year, but I just know a lot more in detail, and obviously am now in a position where I actually have to make decisions about it.
When you said you wanted a couple more months to review this, is that independent of the timeline for the audit, or are you talking about the audit?
The audit is what the timeline right now is being determined by the audit in terms of our next juncture for potentially making a decision.
And any exposure for the city to like change or breach contract with Axon on this?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if either of you want to. No. Yeah.
About the cameras in the stadium district, how many new cameras are you going to install, and what safeguards will be in place to make sure that they're not on when they're not supposed to be on? And then at the end of the World Cup, do they just kind of stay there off forever?
So I believe is it 20 cameras? 26 for the stadium district? Okay, so it sounds like we will be installing 26 cameras in the stadium district. I believe we have a pretty foolproof methods of making sure they're off, so they will be off unless again there's a credible threat and we decide to turn them on, and then I think they will be subject to the same kind of review that we're doing once we got the results of the audit, and so there'll be a further decision at that point whether we're just moving forward with the planned expansion, in which case we would be turning them on and connecting them to the RTCC or not.
And then for the ALPRs, has Axon indicated a willingness to work to kind of bridge some of the technological gaps that is causing the problem?
I think, yeah, you want to take this one?
Absolutely. Thank you. The answer is yes. We're talking with Axon, as is every other agency that's an Axon user here in the state of Washington, with the restriction on having to geofence when an ALPR system is active. We want to ensure that the maps are correct, that we have all of the businesses and schools and appropriate areas that need to be not having the cameras operating in correct. We need that data correct before we can test and ensure that as vehicles are driving with our patrol officers in them, those cameras, the ALPR cameras, are being turned off appropriately. So we've got some technical hurdles to do. We're working with Axon on that.
Do you have any idea timeline?
Absolutely not. This is all brand new for us. We're going to do it right. That's the important thing.
To follow up on the stadium district, what will be the procedure for flipping the switch, and like what would the threshold be? Who would have final say on that? Will you be reviewing, every?
I'm the mayor, so I have final say. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure that we've defined precisely what credible threat is, but we just know that it's like, you know, the eyes of the world are going to be on Seattle, and there's going to be a lot of there could be potential threats. So we're just we'll be kind of figuring that out. But yeah.
Question for Lee. Does SPD think that it's workable to geofence churches and schools, and and how are you going to define a church? I mean, does that all seem workable? And then also, is there a revenue implication to not being able to use the cameras?
So for the ALPR systems in our patrol vehicles, we're going to be evaluating how workable that is. So if you're a church or a school or a medical center, you have a business license, and that is with the city, and we can identify those parcels where those places are located and use those to build the map and identify the buffers. So that process is beginning now. In terms of the parking enforcement officers, we're going to be turning off those 6 cameras. That will have an impact on revenue. I do not know how much at this point.
Mayor, do you think that this is a waste of taxpayer money to set up all these cameras, turn them on and off, or off indefinitely? Especially when you talked and seen about how crime has escalated in the CID. You said you were invested in investing more in the CID. What does that look like, especially when, kind of a threefold question here, when we've seen such a huge vacancy rate across the downtown core? I mean, how do you prevent businesses from leaving, as we're saying these cameras are helping solve crime? What do you say to business owners who are concerned every day that they may not make it to the World Cup?
Yeah, and to be clear, the cameras in the downtown core will remain on and active in use. And yeah, so I mean, I just think it's really important that we get this decision right. And I think I'll also just go back to, these cameras, while useful to solve crime, they are not the answer to our public safety problems, right? I haven't seen any evidence that they deter or prevent crime, right? They're helpful in solving it. But in terms of actually making our neighborhood safer, we have a lot of other kinds of work to do, right? We have work on our police staffing and making sure that we're building trusting relationships between police and the communities that they're serving in. We have work to do on gun violence prevention. That's another big body of work that my office is taking very seriously right now. We have work to do just on addressing the way drug use and the ways that our unsheltered homelessness crisis intersects with public safety. So there's a lot of different things that we need to be doing in neighborhoods around the city to improve, to make sure that people feel safe and are safe in their neighborhoods. And so I think the cameras are actually a relatively small piece of that, but it's important that we get it right, and so we're doing our due diligence.
One question after that.
What was the SPD response to your decisions?
We've been talking with SPD throughout this process, and again, the folks at the Real-Time Crime Center have been incredibly helpful and welcoming and open with us. And so I think we're all on the same page about how we're moving forward, and we're going to just continue. I think there's work to be done right on the policy side of things. Right, part of the reason why we're doing this is because there's this pilot is relatively new, and so there's a lot of practices that the Real-Time Crime Center folks are doing, which are good, but they're not actually encoded in policies. So we're going to be continuing to work with them on that.
So the chief supports your decisions?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cesar Chavez Park, any thoughts there about on Cloverdale? What's going to happen with that park?
Breaking news. So not really. I mean, I think that's a conversation that if the community wants to have a conversation about that, we can have a conversation about that. And it's not entirely up to Seattle. I believe that's King County's involved in that park as well.
Mayor, you were at the governor's press conference that was disrupted by far-left activists who are against these cameras. What do you say to the people who do not want to compromise at all and refuse to take, again, a no for an answer? They want these cameras totally out of the city.
I mean, I think my remarks were partly speaking to those people and to everyone.
I think that's all of it right now. Unless you're welcome to.
Well, I already nodded at this fellow, so we're going to take one more.
Mayor, just looking at Axon's federal contracts, 30% of their money comes from the Department of Homeland Security, That's about $20 million. 15 million of that comes from ICE and Customs and Border Protection. Why is the city partnering with Axon in particular as opposed to maybe some other company?
I mean, and what other, military industrial complex, right? We got like not that many companies that provide services like this. So I don't know that there's like, if you want to point us to a squeaky clean company to do business with, happy to have ideas.
I don't know, Lee, you could speak any more to the credible threat question and sort of how often, what is the likelihood that Seattle would get a credible threat in advance of an incident at something like the World Cup versus like a random event that we might wish we would have had the cameras on for?
I'm going to defer to a police officer here.
Well, I'm not a police officer.
I'm expert.
Yes. So a credible threat, we have an intelligence unit, and as we stand up our collaborative resources for FIFA regionally, we have a whole team that's focused on making sure that the safety of the venue and the visitors here in the city for those games are top. That's our most important thing that we're doing. So for us, we're going to have in place systems that will allow us to alert to any potential noticed threat that's been published about some activity. Those cameras are off, but if you will, they're on standby in a sense, and they can be brought up to speed pretty quickly. The definition of credible threat or significant incident, we're going to spend some time with our lawyers talking about the actual functionality of what that looks like under what conditions and what categories. So we're going to work through all of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Big meetings in the NBA next week. What has your office done to support the return to basketball here?
I think we're gonna keep the questions on surveillance today. As exciting a topic as that is, I'm sure we'll all hear more soon.